I don't think anything has more information for us than our fear. I think fear is the most beautiful informer if we can actually engage it as our teacher.
Guryan, it is great to have you on Untangle today. Thanks for being with us from Northern California.
Thanks for inviting me, Patricia. I'm excited.
And you call yourself a fear technician. Tell us a little bit about that. What inspired that? Why fear technician? What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out as a coach, and there are many coaches out there. And I noticed early on, I kind of took a different perspective around fear that others did. And so I wanted to stand out from the crowd. And when I thought about what a technician does, I feel like they come in when something isn't really working. They look at the wiring, they figure out what needs to be wired differently, which is a lot of this work. We're unwiring patterns that aren't serving us.
Right.
We're kind of creating new wiring to make sure that we're making decisions from a place of intentionality instead of reacting from fear. And so for me, it was a good kind of riff on this different take than rather just a general form of coaching.
Yeah. Interesting. And why fear? Why did you decide to focus on fear? Were you seeing that in your practice? You know,
Yeah.
it's common, but it's a unique positioning.
Absolutely. And it's not where I started. I was working for a number of companies. I always wanted to try and make a difference in the world or contribute in some way. So I was working for companies that had these moonshot ideas. And unfortunately, I kept having to resign when leadership wasn't in integrity and didn't stay kind of committed to their purpose, if you will.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, purpose and profit get pit against each other, even though I think there is a way. And so eventually, I decided to resign and redesign the process and help leaders be in integrity. First, I actually thought it was empathy. I thought that's what was missing. And so I sat down to build a model on how you could teach empathy, because while it's innate for many people, I think it can be taught. And it was empathy that led me to fear. And so it was when I started this work, it was really a hypothesis about the way that fear kind of can have its grips on us and impact the way we make decisions. And then based on conversation after conversation, I started learning more and more and more about fear. I should also say that I believe all research is me search. And I'm not sure that I had the healthiest relationship with my fear. And so part of it was definitely self serving to understand a better way that I could go through my existence with intentionality.
What is the connection between empathy and fear? So you originally thought leaders and humans in general needed to have more empathy, which of course they do. But how did that lead you to fear?
So I actually think fear is the pathway to our complete authenticity. Fear is really trying to show us who we are and what matters most to us. And I think when we understand who we are, it's almost an output to allow other people to be who they are. And furthermore, communities are based in commonalities. And what my work with fear showed me is that we all have the same fears. When we really bring them down to the basics, I don't think anything crosses more lines than fear. And so, what unfortunately has been used to divide us by governments, by religions, by businesses it's the one thing I think that can unite us. And this was something I found very early when I would work in groups. While I never used the word empathy, when I would ask for key takeaways, that was the number one thing that came up.
Fear.
And I said, yeah, fear. Empathy, when I would lead workshops on fear, empathy was the number one takeaway because people could start to see themselves in others.
But you were saying that fear is the thing that connects all of us. Does this get into like our 8 basic fears?
Exactly. So you might have the fear of rejection, or you might have the fear of abandonment and self-worth. You might have the fear of feeling directionless. You don't know what your purpose is. So, and when you start to see that other people also experience that, the
Yeah.
line of othering and division kind of comes down it's the same wiring that has us want to belong. Those commonalities really do help create communities, and
Yeah.
people can start to see themselves in others.
I get that. I get that the way you just described that, because if we all feel we have similar fears, we can understand each other in a very profound way. When we are so let's get into like a little bit of the somatic nature of fear. When we feel fear, so fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of aging, fear of public speaking,
Yes.
anything, Is the same thing going on in our brains and our bodies with all fears, or is there a different kind of trigger to our nervous systems or our amygdala? Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit
Yes,
about that? Yeah.
absolutely. And great question. So, the biggest issue I think when it comes to fear is we were never taught the difference between rational and irrational fear.
Yeah.
Rational fear is why we had that amygdala, it's to protect our survival. It's the home of fight, flight, freeze, and a slightly lesser known one, but is growing in popularity, which is fawning. Fawning is when we appease the threat, which is the home of people pleasing, which I see as being very common. That being said, we never trained our brains to respond differently. So fears are the fears that live in the future tense. They're the what if. So what if, let's take the recent one you said, what if I get on stage and forget what I'm going to say? What if I get on stage and nobody's interested in what I have to say? It's all the what if scenarios.
Mhm.
We never took the time to teach our brain to respond differently. It is doing just that, which is moving into the stress reaction whenever it senses fear. And so we might react with a fight, flight, freeze, fawn reaction to that irrational fear because we haven't actually learned to engage with that information differently. We are the ones that have to train our brains to respond to rational and irrational fears differently.
And you're teaching us how to do that. One guest that we had on the show was talking about trauma and said there's a big T and a little t, but your nervous system defines whether it's a big T or a little t. It's not the actual trauma. In the definition of fear, so there's fear of public speaking, but there's fear of getting a horrible disease, dying in a painful way, suffering for a long period of time. And those are all what ifs, and there may be a probability. How do you work with people so that, on the little f and the big F, how do you work with people to what would be the right thing to appease their nervous system
Actually, I'm
to
going to take
have
it
a
a step
better
further.
relationship?
Yeah, it's not only having a better relationship, it's living your life in the most intentional way. I don't think anything has more information for us than our fear. So, quick reframe here. I think fear is the most beautiful informer if we can actually engage it as our teacher. So, I don't believe in overcoming or conquering or getting by or trying to silence anything like that. So, fear is coming up because something matters to you. Something you're concerned about, something is being threatened, a value that you have. But even if we take the case of the questions that you just asked, the first trick is actually turning towards the fear. One of my favorite words, I'm going to take a step back. So we all have cues, right? When you're in fear, you might start breathing shorter or hold your breath. Some people get hot. Some people get cold. Some people start clenching their jaw. Your body is giving you cues if you're talking about this from a semantics perspective.
Mhm.
But one thing to do is to start noticing if you have any tells, if you will, that your body is communicating to you through. The other thing is, whenever you notice, we typically, even if it takes us a minute, some of us can get in kind of a negative loop, but we know when we're ruminating. We know when we're what ifing. We know when we have the feelings of anxiety and fear. So the first thing we want to do is slow that down. The only word I have on my desk and everyone that I work with has on their desk is this word, which is pause. Okay. So once we pause, we can actually engage in a different way. And so what those questions are showing you is that something matters to you. Okay, so what if I could get some disease? Okay, well then let's look at that. Well, what, if anything, can you do to educate yourself? Is there genetic information that you can find out? What is your diet? What is your exercise? What is your lifestyle? What is your thinking around it? Because I'm very much of the mind that our brain is really validating the information we give it. It's
Mhm.
not really in service of what's best for us. So if we are looking for problematic situations, those situations are more likely to arise than not. But those fears are really showing us, is this a place that I can learn more information about? Does this matter to me? Why does this matter to me? Is it asking me to show up differently? Because our fears are really showing us what we care about and where we want to grow.
Mhm. Okay, so engaging with the fear in a different way transforms the fear. This is the premise, but What about for people who have such a hard time with perseverating or ruminating? And, you talk in your book about the influence of storytelling and reframing certain emotions or stories that we have. How do you invite people to
First
do
steps.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's not easy. I believe we
Yeah.
are what we practice, and we're practicing something all the time. And if you take that into perspective from a neurological
Yeah.
perspective, every time you make a decision, you fire a neuron down a pathway. When you react the same way in similar circumstances again and again, that pathway becomes what they call a superhighway. And once it's a superhighway, your brain loses the ability to know that there's a decision point there. It's an automatic reaction. So for many people, ruminating, practicing negative spiral loops, this is automatic. And I will often hear this. This is just who I am. This is how I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, again, I actually believe we are what we practice. That doesn't mean it's not easy to start practicing differently. But so a couple of things. One thing is to just break the loop, which is what I call something. It's called nexting. So every time you hear, maybe are you familiar with that?
Well, no, I was looking at that in your book. Yeah.
So every time, what if I get on stage and I forget what I'm going to say? Next. What if nobody's in the audience? Next. What if nobody cares what I have to say? Next. You just keep on nexting. You might say next 13 times. You might say next 63 times. The point is, you're just trying to break the pattern.
Are you trying to drop it and let go of it, or are you just engaging with it in a different way and trying to bring, to me, that's a little funny. You're bringing a little humor to it. It's like, okay, I think you said you have an inner
Critic.
voice, Gretchen.
Yeah, so it's actually it's a two-part process. Thank you for the perfect segue. So there was a time I was walking down the street one day and I stopped myself in my tracks because I realized if any of my friends talked to me the way that I talk to me, I'd
Yeah.
punch them in the face.
Right.
And
Right.
so that day I named her Gretchen. Gretchen is a beautiful name, but I knew a Gretchen that bullied me when I was young. And what was important to me is it started with a G. And the critic is part of me. Just like fear, it's not something I'm trying to expel or get rid of. I want to engage it in a different way. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But what naming her enabled me to do was create space because she's not there all the time. She comes around at different times. She has different playgrounds. So I
Right.
could start to see, when is she showing up? Why is she showing up? And I could create that pause to say, okay, hold on. Rather than just coming in with the cruelty, let's discover why you're actually here. Because again, I think fear has so much value for us. So I'm going to give you that example now. So I could say, I'm the worst granddaughter. I'm a terrible granddaughter. Or I could turn towards Gretchen and say, what are you doing here? I want to make an hour of uninterrupted time this weekend to call my grandma. Well, one is completely valuable and showing me that this is something that matters to me. Maybe I'm not prioritizing it, so it's easy to be judgmental. So one is coming in just ruminating on loop, negative spiral. The other is showing me this is something I value. It's important to me. I want to do something about that. But if I don't have that space from Gretchen, it's hard to see that. And I love that you invited in humor because now, and it takes time like anything, we need to build our muscles. But now when Gretchen comes around, I can kind of cock my eyebrow at her and be like, what are you doing here? Like, what are you showing up for? It takes time.
It does.
It
Does
takes time.
Gretchen lash out at other people sometimes?
What an interesting question. She's toughest on me. I would definitely say, but when she wants to, that's a fantastic question. I've never been asked that question. When she wants to, it says more about me than the person that she wants to lash out against. So for
Right.
instance, if
Yes.
she's
Yes.
stirring anger in me, that's something that I haven't yet healed in myself or answered or been truthful to in myself. Or
Yeah.
let's go back to let's say it's fear of abandonment. Fear of abandonment, one way if you're protecting yourself is to not speak to your needs. So if my anger comes out, that's actually because I'm not being truthful to myself, not because of the person that's ignoring needs that I haven't spoken to.
Yeah, and you're not taking care of yourself. You're not
That's
taking
right.
care of that moment. I have a inner, I don't know what to call her, but her name's Brenda.
Okay.
She comes out when I play pickleball because I get so mad at myself, but I end up getting mad at other people. They slam too hard, they do this, they do that. But she comes out I sort of fancy her my inner critic and the inner judger of other people as well sometimes. So I have to calm her down.
Yeah. And
But
then
I think it is good to name, I think it's great to name the person, name that part of you because it gives it a voice and then you can engage with that voice.
Well, and oftentimes I find our fear shows up when our values are being threatened, but unfortunately, not many of us have sat down and written out what our values are.
Right.
So, because we're not focused on what we're trying to bring in, we focus on what's triggered or what's lacking, and it's much easier to point externally. Which, again, let's bring this back to the beginning. One of the challenges with where we find ourselves today on a more macro environment is we haven't been taught to be with our fear or our pain. So it's easier to throw your wounds
Yeah.
than it is to look at maybe what's kind of wanting your attention within.
Well, then that sort of begs the question, what is the relationship between pain and fear? And does pain trigger or fuel our fears because it's real? And so that then crosses into your real versus your rational versus irrational fears.
Absolutely. So I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to answer something different first because they're very connected to me, which is why I think as this culture,
Okay.
especially, but around the world, I work with people around the world. I think it was a disservice of putting the pursuit of happiness into our declaration for two reasons. First, it took happiness outside of ourselves and it put it somewhere out there to go and get. And second, it put a kind of negative stigma on all emotions that aren't deemed positive or happy.
Interesting. Yeah.
So pain is informative, fear, informative, guilt, anger, jealousy, all of these things, they're rich with information for us. But we fear fear and we fear pain. And I have found no two better allies than fear and pain. I think they're best friends. I say that they're in cahoots. So what happens is, and I'm going to give an example so this isn't just hypothetical. When we experience a pain, it's almost like we get frozen in time and our fear body, if you will, comes around to that pain body and says, I promise that I'm never going to let you feel like that ever again for the rest of your life. So then we develop protective mechanisms, and I'm putting air quotes around that because I don't believe they are protective mechanisms. In the long run, they might be in that moment. So let's make this tangible. So let's say there's a kid on a playground, maybe in elementary school, has a very vivid imagination that day, comes to school wearing two different socks, two different shoes, all sorts of mixed matched, just expressing some great creativity. And let's say they get bullied. Let's say they even get beat up.
Hmm.
Fear comes around to pain that day, says, you're never going to feel like that ever again. So maybe the next day it's jeans and a gray sweatshirt. Okay, maybe that was necessary in that environment. But now fast forward to high school. Maybe that kid doesn't raise their hands when it's time to ideate or come up with a new idea. Now you get to college and you're presenting with a group. Maybe this is the one that says in the background, well, I'll do the work behind the scenes. You guys present. Then you get to a conference room and it's, well, you guys do the brainstorm. Just tell me what to do afterwards. Making yourself smaller, 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 because that was the protective mechanism to make sure that you didn't feel that pain again. This is how
Mm.
uncomfortable and unfamiliar we are from experiencing that pain. Now, I would say that fear is actually showing you exactly what you want to heal in yourself. If you have a direct line to your intuition, you're getting messages on where you want to grow. If you don't, your fear is literally showing you where you want to grow or what wants to be healed by showing you where not to go. Which brings us back to that humor and levity and irony a little bit. There's an ironic element to this relationship, but you could be scared of everything. Most people are not. There are some people that have more fears than others, but most people are not.
Hmm.
And so that fear that comes up every time, again, is actually showing you, wait a minute, I want to turn towards that. And there are ways to start turning towards our fear neurologically and from an action behavioral perspective.
Well, when you say neurologically, there are ways to turn toward our fear.
What are
What do you
those?
mean? Yeah. Yeah.
So, as we've talked about, we've mentioned the amygdala a couple of times. So, when you're in fear, you're in that amygdala. That's that home of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And it doesn't feel like choice. That is that stress reaction.
Yes.
However, three things that they have found that have brain activity in your prefrontal cortex, which is the home of creativity, connection, decision making, empathy, are curiosity, gratitude, and purpose. And I can give examples for all of those. Now, what's so important if we come back is to that pause. As soon as you noticed you are having a fear reaction, if you pause and take a breath, then you can actually choose to go down one of the pathways. So curiosity, can I take a moment and break each one down?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yes, please.
Okay, so curiosity, there's two questions that you can pose to break down the story of fear and the actual moment, which is what is true and what am I telling myself is true?
That's
So
interesting.
let's go to that presentation again. What is true? This is really important to me. I'm really passionate about this topic. I think that it can make a difference. If I reach one person in the audience, I will be pleased. What am I telling myself is true? No one's going to show up. What am I telling myself is true? No one's going to care what I have to say. I'm going to forget what I have to say. Okay, so one is actually bringing me back to what matters, what's important to keep me present, to keep me focused, what is needed to show up in that way, which might mean what's one talking point that I can get. If I forget every line, what's the one sentence I want to take with me? There are ways to get back in that present moment. Gratitude is thrown around a lot, like a buzzword, maybe a little woo. This is another thing that actually has activity in our prefrontal cortex, and our brain doesn't know what you're grateful for. So you don't have to be grateful for the very challenge you're going through in that moment. Anything that you're grateful for will make that shift. And purpose is the third. Purpose is when we are aligned to something that we're in service to, it helps kind of make our concerns about ourselves a little bit smaller. So I'll give you an example. I have a line. It's my why is bigger than I.
Mm,
So if I can reach one person, then what am I doing? What I'm doing it for matters more than if I'm a little uncomfortable.
mhm.
So these are three pathways that we can actually start to empower ourselves to engage the fear. It's not overcoming, it's engaging because that fear has information for us.
When you talk about having information, I'm always a little puzzled by the connection or the interplay of fear versus intuition. So I'll get a strong feeling about something and I might be nervous or have some discomfort around it. Is that my intuition giving me direction or is that a fear? And how do I go? What practice do I use to tell the difference between the two of them?
So that's a great question. And I think it's more nuanced for those that have a more direct line to their intuition. I think the first thing is always to take an assessment of your environment to see if there is a legitimate risk. If there is a legitimate risk, then I'm probably going to say err on the side of trust your intuition.
Yeah. Yeah.
That being said, if you have taken an assessment and there is no imminent threat to your risk, then to me, that's the time to start getting curious. Because that is me thinking that fear, your intuition, because here's the thing, I wish we did. We don't typically make changes through comfort,
Right.
right?
Un-
I wish we did. I really do. But it's when things are uncomfortable. And so sometimes I think our intuition is actually in service to our fear, which is in service to our growth and healing. It's a little bit of a pathway there. But so it gets our attention because, again, if we go back to the happy or positive emotions, that's not when people are making the big changes in their
yeah.
life. It's
Yeah.
not that they're not enjoyable, they definitely are, but they all have a value that they serve.
Yeah.
And I do really believe that we make big changes in our life when things are, I mean, oftentimes I'll say to myself when I'm working with a client, well, I wonder if they're uncomfortable enough.
Hmm. Yeah. We get a little push, get a little
Exactly.
push. What are the 8 core fears?
So I'm going to pull them up so I make sure that I get them right. I haven't memorized them. Let me see here. So these are the ones that I have found again talking to. So I've been doing this for about 9 years and I've spoken with thousands of people in this time. What's really important that people understand is that you might not have all 8 of these.
Yeah.
You might have one, you might have a couple, and depending on where you are in your life, one might become louder. What I have typically found is that these do relate back to pains or traumas that people have had in their life. The other thing that I want to just kind of put as a disclaimer out there is it's very easy for people to compare. So they might lessen a pain or a trauma that they've had because it's not as big as one that somebody else had.
Hmm.
From this perspective, everybody's own experience is all they know. And so I just don't want to lessen anyone's experience of their own pain because they might know somebody that went through something larger. It's just about understanding the self. Right. So the eight that I have found are, and I'm not going to say fear of in front of everyone. So the first is loss and letting go. The second is rejection, not being liked or accepted, or abandonment. The third is loneliness and isolation. The fourth is self-worth. So being good enough, failure, inadequacy. The fifth is authenticity, not being one true self, which also might be a fear of success. The sixth is feeling lost or directionless. The seventh is a more general, and this might be for someone that kind of has heightened anxiety everywhere, but just the fear of scarcity.
Mm,
And then the last is the fear of death and the loss of self.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, those are the big things. I mean, and I think the next level, like fear of public speaking falls under self-worth. I think these are the big buckets. And in your book, you talk about how curiosity helps us with each of these fears. And are we back to like getting to know? So let's say I have fear of loss. I'm going to lose my partner, my dog, like my friends, my family. Like, what do I do with that? And how
Mhm.
does maybe curiosity help me engage there?
Yeah. So the slightly disappointing, not disappointing, but the reality is it's not a magic diet pill. There's no simple algorithm. It's really understanding the self, understanding what's important to you. But in the book are some ways for each of those fears. There's a couple of ways that people can react. You might have an unintentional opening or an unintentional closing. And so I'll walk through what that might be. So I can't live without fill in the blank, or I get fear of this person, or this animal or whatever. So if you have an unintentional opening, therefore you might create the illusion of control and hardship for yourself to hang on to it. And the unintentional closing is therefore I give up, I won't live, I won't care, whatever it is. So you might go one of two ways. So that's the reaction to get you to notice, okay, which sometimes I have people that can identify with the reaction more than they can own the fear initially. Because
Hmm.
fear, and we fear pain so much. This is something people have avoided looking at or owning most of their life, but they can say, oh, well, that's my pattern. That's what I do all the time. So then this is a doorway into recognizing, okay, well, this is what's at the base. That's why I call them the basal fears. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is start to get curious. And those are those two questions. I know they seem very basic, or they might seem very basic, but they're quite rich, which is, what am I telling myself is true? And what is true? After you walk through those two, then there's nuanced questions like, well, what is important to me about that? What is important to me about that actually starts to bring in intentionality. So you might actually say, okay, well, this is the life that I want to be building. This is the value in this relationship I want to have. So for instance, if it's going to the loss of someone, we certainly can't control how long somebody is going to be here or how that is going to come to a transition. But we can control the amount of time that we spend with them, the priority that we make around it, what we communicate. Communicating true feelings is really scary for people, whether it's to themselves or to others. But I think there are ways of living so truly and fully that, at least while, again, you might have grief afterwards. And I think grief is love, which also hasn't really been taught to us. And not to say that grief is easy, but what we can do is make sure that we showed up the way that we wanted to in all the time that we had to do so. And it could be that fear that is showing us, or at least asking of us, to connect to whether or not we're doing that.
Yeah. And I think what you were saying about, it is true. Control is an illusion. And in the Buddhist tradition, yeah, I remember hearing this when I was in my 20s and thinking, that's horrible. But it's the reality of old age, sickness, and death. And you're like running out of the room because it feels so far away. But that is a truth. I mean, there are some truths. And I think a measure of acceptance is also really important. And then your idea of curiosity, how do I engage with this? What does it mean? What am I telling myself? What can I do to make this time that I have more loving and productive is so important. How does, I think you talk about, and a lot of people on our show talk about this idea of self awareness, and all of what you're saying really ramps up to self-awareness and
Absolutely.
being more in touch with all of what we feel and what we know and what we hope for. How do you think about self-awareness and how does that fit into, maybe even the 8 fears and just
Yeah.
really understanding them?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the first chapters of the book is all about self-awareness and the importance
Yes.
of it. It's pretty remarkable to me.
Yes.
What I do want to just kind of offer to the listeners is what we are capable of is incredible. I know that right now we're talking about like the grasp fear might have on you or the patterning, but what's wildly amazing is that we can unwire what's in our subconscious also to start making different choices. So
Mm,
what we are capable of, I want people to feel like there's actually there's a lot of hope here
yeah.
because that's what I get to work with all day is the people that actually do want to do this differently. Self-awareness is definitely the way in because it's how we go. Let's go back to that technician. You get to
Mhm.
become your own technician with your awareness because you get to see what wiring might not be working, what
Right.
wiring might be from decades ago that definitely could use an upgrade, and what wiring is still sturdy and working really well because it's generally not it's not a whole mothership that you need to replace. There's a remodeling of sorts.
Mhm.
Modeling is also kind of the doorway to who we are. But a good way to start practicing for someone that this idea might seem foreign with, start thinking your thoughts out loud. I mean, what really led me to the pause initially
Hmm.
was when I was first getting to know Gretchen, I couldn't believe how often she came around. And so I mean, it was if you give her one thing, she's loyal. But when I would speak out loud, I would, okay, pause, enough, hold on. Like first I just had to, because it starts to run so low level. When it gets loud enough, it's probably been on loop for a while for many of us. So even just talking out loud, because I do believe that the words we use and the thoughts we use create our reality. But something that simple, if you start to think your thoughts out loud, you can hear, you can start to pause, and then you can start to engage differently. Another way is to start bringing some of these practices in proactively. Curiosity, that's a muscle. Gratitude, that's a muscle. When I was kind of in my when what brought me, you asked me originally what brought me to this work. So I was in a 10-year marriage that I left. I was in a job that I left. And I thought if you just create space, then new comes in your life. If you just create space at first, there's just space. Then it felt like Alice's rabbit hole. And I learned all the darkest shadows about myself because I had the space to do that. And I kind of was in a spiral that I knew wasn't serving me. And so my intuition had me walk over to my kitchen counter and I got a mason jar and I got a stack of Post-it notes. And every morning, what was my gateway to be able to get up was to write something down I was grateful for.
Mm.
I needed to start my day with a different mentality. Because if we look at what fear is lack. Fear is
Mhm.
gratitude is abundance. Okay. And one might be what you have, it might be what you're hoping for, but it has that present moment. But even that was a practice of self awareness because I could see, oh, my natural inclination would have been to, most people get up and start the day with lack, which is simply, I don't have enough time to get to all the things I need to get to today. Just that thought alone sends off a scarcity pattern of thinking through your day because X begets more X. So if I'm going to start my day with lack limited thinking without understanding that that might be causing my attention or calling my attention, then that's the pattern that I'm going to continue with. So practicing curiosity, practicing gratitude, asking purpose doesn't have to, I referenced a big purpose for myself. Purpose could be, I want to make a connection with a stranger today. I mean, that could just be how do I smile at somebody walking next to me on the bike path? Do I hold the door open for the person that's 12 feet away coming into the coffee shop? Purpose doesn't have to be life changing. Purpose can just be present and intentionality of how you want to meet that day. Do you want to connect with a smile? So there's internal ways like starting to talk to yourself. And then there are these other practices because I have found that those three, gratitude, curiosity, and purpose, also bring you into the present moment. Because when you're in fear, you are not in the present moment. You are in the future tense. You are running what if scenarios. So the first thing we want to get, and it's hard to be self aware when we're not here.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first thing we want to do is get back to this moment.
And what role does courage have in that moment?
So interesting. So I actually think courage and fear are basically the same coin and even a very thin coin. So any courageous decision you've made in your life, my guess is that you were in fear right before it.
Interesting. Okay, so you think that fear is the impetus.
I actually think fear is courage unrealized. I think courage is our fear is showing us where to apply our courage. And
Okay.
fear, again, has us in that stress reaction. It has us hold on to the inhale. We're not moving. Courage is when we exhale and move into that very thing. So oftentimes, again, and if we bring this back to our fear is showing us where we want to grow, growing takes courage. It's not easy. Getting out of your comfort zone, not easy. Being who you are, kind of scary because that comes back to that because we are wired to belong, then
Hmm.
we do think it needs to look like what everybody else is doing, wearing all of these things, what capitalism and consumerism tells us. I mean, even look at consumerism. You're not enough of X, but if you buy this, you will be. So fear is so woven into the fabric. And that's the other thing. I ask people to be patient with themselves, give whether or not we've been choosing to,
Hmm.
fear has been used against us by a multitude of audiences. And so it really it is something that we can break and it takes a minute to do so.
Yeah. So it takes a minute or more.
Mhm.
What you talked about nexting as one practice. What are some other practices you would recommend to our audience?
I'll start zoomed out and I'll zoom in. Right now, we live in a time where fear is a little bit higher. It could be reading the news, it could be hearing about what's going on places. So, the first thing when anyone experiences any tension, I would ask them to ask themselves the question, is this fear mine?
And wait, what does that mean?
It means fear is contagious. And so sometimes we can pick up the energy of fear and go into those reactions, and it's actually not having an impact on us in that moment. That's
Okay.
not to say that it's not something to be concerned about or learn more about, but in that actual moment, is this fear mine or have I taken on a collective fear, a fear that's out there because I read something, somebody told me something, I saw a clip. I don't know if the clip is real or if it was AI generated. It's a very easy time to get triggered.
Okay.
So, meaning, is this mine? Am I in fear about something right now, or is my life in danger in this moment? So first,
Okay.
just come back. We want to settle the system. Okay. Yes. If you're ruminating, if you're looping, nexting is really it's a powerful way to break that pattern. Naming the critic
Hmm.
and then leveraging these doorways of curiosity, gratitude, and purpose.
Okay.
And the other things to do is our bodies have all our information for us. All our information for us. And because our lives weren't in danger, when our body was giving us the cues that there was irrational fear, we ignored them because, well, I would argue that something did happen, but it didn't happen from a living perspective. And so I encourage you to start to pay attention to, again, are you holding your breath? Do your ears get hot? Do you get cold? Are your hands getting sweaty? All of these are indications that irrational fear is about to take over. And
Mm.
it might take over until we have a relationship with it. But so for me now, I can notice, and I have an ironic one because I get up on stage and talk to people about fear. And one of mine is getting cold. You can't get on stage and talk to people about the value of fear when your teeth are chattering. So that was something that I had to work on. But again, that was fear showing me this is really important. You want to,
Yeah.
this matters. Okay, how
Yeah.
do you want to show up? Do you want to show up trying to have memorized every line, or do you want to show up being present and engaged with the audience? Like it really did connect me to what mattered.
Yeah.
That was so important. And so when you notice your cues, that's the amazing thing of the unwiring. We can actually get ahead of the pattern and start creating new neural pathways. You don't have to obliterate a pathway.
Yeah.
We have the ability to learn and unlearn at the same time, which is pretty remarkable. So we can start practicing new pathways while we're moving away from ones that don't serve.
Yeah. I love the idea of noticing your cues. So I'm going to ask you one last
Mhm.
question, which is how has your work with fear, immersing yourself in fear over the last 9 years in the study of fear and practice, how has it transformed you personally?
Twofold. Well, actually, what the answer for me is true for the people that I've seen too. And this was a unintended benefit that I never knew. I don't think anything leads us to who we truly are, like fear is. Fear does. And I think when you are who you truly are, your path presents itself to you. You don't have to figure out what your career is going to be, who your partner is, where you're going to live. If you want to talk about serendipity, alignment, and intuition, you are truly who you are. Your path presents itself to you. And I've gotten to experience that, and I get to experience that with so many people that I work with, and it takes my breath away in awe every time.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of this great work with us. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you, Guryan.
Thank you, Patricia. I really enjoyed the conversation.